Have you ever played a game and just thought to yourself, wow, that was a truly unique experience? And as the years go on and games progress, you can't help wondering how much better would that game be if it were attempted again today? Game mechanics are basically features that make a game tick. It's now become common practice for games to have mechanics such as health, objectives, level up, or skill tree systems. However, even though games are only getting bigger and more complex by the year, some game mechanics have either been replaced or lost to time. And it's these forgotten gems that I would like to explore with you today. So, let's go back to the good old days of gaming. Sightjacking. Siren is well known in the horror genre as a classic for many reasons. It was able to successfully provide the player with an overwhelming sense of vulnerability, as it successfully blended traditional Western horror film techniques with more subtle psychological themes, which are iconic to Japanese horror. The game's dark environments, vulnerable characters, and really eerie sounds had me terrified when I played as a child, but one game mechanic stood out from the rest. Sightjacking. Sightjacking allowed players to literally look through the eyes of the shibito that were trying to kill them. This added a totally unique perspective to the horror genre in video games, as it allowed the player a glimpse into what the shibito could see and hear, which was often drowned out by really disturbing groans. But through their vision, the player could also spot themselves, displayed as a glint on the screen. The larger the glint, the closer they were to the shibito that they were sightjacking. However, when sightjacking, the player character is left completely vulnerable to any attack, which just adds an extra layer of fear to an already overwhelmingly terrifying game. As someone who really enjoys horror games, but is also very scared of them, this pushed me out of my comfort zone, forcing me to get close to what I was afraid of in order to use it to my advantage. I'd love to see what games could do with this concept now, seeing as it's been over a decade since the last Siren game released back in 2008. Memo system. Gregory Horror Show is a not so well-known horror game. However, it became something of a cult classic to those who had the luck of stumbling across it, myself included. The game centered around a hotel which would slowly fill with guests who wanted to harm you in the worst way possible. Death. The player's goal was to steal the souls of these guests in order for them to escape the hotel. However, they had to do this without being caught first. The only way to do this was to learn the routines and weaknesses of the guests to use to your advantage. And, as you might expect, stealth is a pivotal aspect of the game. Now, eavesdropping is not a unique concept within the gaming world. However, using it alongside the game's memo system rewards the player for their patient sneaking. When the player begins the game, they're presented with a book full of empty time slots for each guest. This suggests the times when these guests will be occupied doing a certain task. To reveal what the guests are doing within these time slots, the player can eavesdrop on them to listen to a thought dialogue in its entirety. These tasks repeat daily, allowing the player a chance to discover what the guests are up to at each time slot until they have discovered enough information through the thought dialogues to retrieve their next soul and progress to the next level. The benefit to this is not only discoverability, but it's also the ability to track where each dangerous guest will be by simply looking at your memo. The more sneaking the player does, the better the payoff. The concept of peering through keyholes and listening in on NPC conversations still happens quite regularly in games today. However, using it with this system allows a way for users to retain the information that they learn, as well as influencing gameplay. especially when the game revolves around stealth and avoiding characters. As someone who loves to admire the details of games and will actively go out of my way to learn as much about the game's characters as I can, this concept naturally makes me really excited. I want to learn the daily routines of a game's characters, especially in a way that can influence gameplay. So I want to play a game like this again, even if it doesn't have an oddly aroused pink lizard.
Time for a blood test. Oh, this is so good. Oh.
Random events. Random events, in my opinion, is something that got explored a lot around the PlayStation 2 era and started to fizzle out in favour of more open world games with branching narratives. Sticking to the horror theme, Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem has a sanity system that triggers random events whenever the player's sanity gets low. These events are varied, including having your inventory appear empty, having fake enemies surrounding you, having your character grow or shrink, or even having their head fall off and recite Hamlet.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
Some random events only occur at certain chapters within the game, which makes this mechanic an integral part of the game's discoverability and replayability.
The darkness is coming.
Silent Hill also had some effective uses of random events, which left players on their toes, wondering if danger was really ahead of them. Of course, most times in horror games, an atmosphere will build up around a player to cause suspense with audio and visuals whenever they are about to face something that is made to scare them. However, Silent Hill 2 incorporates random scare events, such as unintelligible whispers in rooms, or even a doorknob rattling on the other side of a door, when really there is nothing there technically for a player to fear. No. Do you hear this? Having random events causes the player to not always trust the game that they're playing, which might not work well for all games, but for these examples, it really created the sense of anxiousness that is needed to elevate the fear within a horror game. Very much like the unreliable narrator technique in books, if done well, this can create some really memorable and unique experiences, if anybody is brave enough to try and pull it off. Hidden choices. Talking of Silent Hill 2, I'd also like to talk about its use of subtle player choices that influenced its many different endings. Nowadays, many games offer player agency by giving the player choices throughout the game's narrative. However, these choices are more often than not made very obvious to the player through either a dialogue choice or a quick time event. Narratively driven games such as Life is Strange and Telltale's games will put these choices on screen for the player to choose from. And more often than not, they would also flag to let the players know when a choice will be pivotal to the game's narrative direction and ending. During Silent Hill 2, however, the game logs the small actions that would depict the natural playstyle of the player, and this is what influences the game's ending. Silent Hill 2 spoilers, if that's still a thing. Some examples are triggering an underwater ending if a player depicts risky behaviour by taking a lot of damage and not healing very often, which shows James's lack of respect for his own life. A good ending, which is influenced by many things, including reading a letter from James's wife, Mary,
In my restless dreams.
and the Maria ending if a player actively gives a lot of attention to the character of Maria, who is a seductive portrayal of James's wife, Mary. Actions like defending her from monsters and checking on her when she decides to stay in a hotel room all add up to getting that ending. Allowing players to influence a game's narrative makes for a personalized experience and also adds some replayability. By making these choices very obvious to the player, it informs them of the importance of this choice and the impact that it could possibly have on the game world. However, I feel like the downside to offering this much information to a player is that it could possibly break immersion, allowing them the time to think logically about their choices instead of doing what feels natural, which, in my opinion, would allow for more interesting results. If we take away this information and allow players to act on impulse instead of over-analysing every choice they're about to make, then perhaps players could learn a little bit more about themselves along the way. I did try and do kind of a demo of this in my game Perfection on itch.io, where I analysed playstyles.
Characteristic synopsis. Is patient curious about their environment? They proved somewhat curious, but remained focused. That sounds like a...
Yes.
Feel free to check it out, link in the description. No problem if not, but... Fixed camera angles. Fixed camera angles used to be a staple in the horror genre due to the technical limitations of the time. However, as games have progressed and these limitations are no longer a concern, we saw them replaced with more favourable camera views such as first person or third person. In many ways, this is a positive thing because it allows more immersion for the player to have control over the camera and what they can see. However, I can't help but miss the fear that came with not knowing what was beyond the bounds of the fixed camera angle. Games like Resident Evil and Alone in the Dark utilise this lack of player control to their advantage by handcrafting what a player could see and when. This would often heighten scary scenes such as monster reveals and also bring attention to important items. It allowed for creative camera cutaways that helped environmental storytelling in ways that we could not recreate with a more modern first-person camera view. For example, this shot in Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, when the player runs in front of a mansion and suddenly sees the camera switch to show someone watching them from within the building. There are many benefits to giving full control to the player over the camera, especially in regards to gameplay. However, through doing so, we lose the ability to handcraft these moments that have been so memorable within the history of the horror game genre, and I would love to see what games could do with it today. And if you want to hear more, I do discuss it in depth on my video all about fixed camera angles and the forgotten horrors of them. Personalised events. Similar to hidden choices are personalised events, where a game would take either a player's actions they had already taken through the game, or even their own information, and utilise this to create personalised experiences. Metal Gear Solid is highly praised for its groundbreaking design that paved the way for a new genre of stealth games. However, this wasn't the only mechanic that was remembered for its ingenuity. The boss battle with Psycho Mantis subverted player expectations by using their own gameplay and data against them. Like Silent Hill 2, the game had been subtly tracking player actions, but instead of using this to affect an ending, Psycho Mantis would actually relay this back to the player through their dialogue.
You are extremely careful of traps. You are either very cautious, or you are a coward.
Psycho Mantis would also famously quote on any saved Konami games that the players had on their memory cards.
You like Castlevania, don't you? You enjoy role-playing games.
I understand it's more difficult now to derive player information, especially in a time where games are made to be cross-platform. However, I'd love to see what information games could pull from an Xbox account or PlayStation or Steam to create these truly fourth wall breaking moments. Imagine seeing your profile picture framed in the game, or perhaps one of the NPCs or possible enemies has one of your friends' user tags from Steam or wherever else. Human AI combat. It's common for a player to run into different enemy types in a game that all have varying levels of difficulty and combat styles. Perhaps one NPC is slow moving and has a shield to protect their front from a distance, while another is fast moving and goes straight in for the attack. However, both of these NPCs have one thing in common, and that is, no matter their combat style, they will stay within the player's vicinity. Condemned Criminal Origins introduced a whole new style of combat for its NPCs when it was released in 2015 that I can only describe as being human. These enemies are deranged criminals that have definitely taken a little hit of something funky, and the game's melee combat system forces the player to get up close and uncomfortable with them. But what has stuck with me the most is their unique fighting style. Instead of running at the player to attack them, the player would instead hear them first and, upon getting closer, then catch a glimpse of them running off through the many doors or blown out holes of the environment. Some would even attempt to hide in the room to catch you off guard. And this, alongside the mainly melee combat, really kept the player on guard at all times. One iconic part of the game was within a shopping mall, which was filled with Christmas decorations, shattered display cases, and, of course, mannequins. Instead of running away here, some enemies would stand still in the hopes that they would blend in with the many mannequins dotted around the wide open spaces. There, they would wait patiently to see if a player would get close enough to get a jump on them. Understandably, this made players distrust any mannequins they came across and forced them to scan any room they entered looking for suspicious figures that could be a frozen enemy in disguise. Something about realizing a shape in front of me was actually an enemy waiting to attack me was seriously unnerving, as so often it took a while for the details to present themselves through the darkness and give way to the figure's true nature. I'd stand there, watching them, watching me, and nothing has quite creeped me out in that way since. Immersive skill progression. Skill trees are a pivotal part of player progression in RPGs, as they allow for players to invest in particular skills that then enhance their preferred playstyle. These skill trees are usually available within the game's menu, where a player can assign skill points once they have been unlocked through leveling. This manual process gives the players visibility over the many possible paths of the skill tree, so they can make an informed decision on where to use their skill points. However, in the past, there have been games that try a more immersive approach to progressing through these skill trees. Bethesda's RPG games, such as Morrowind and Oblivion, focus on assigning skill points to in-game actions, weapons, and objects. And due to this, skill points would progress due to the player's natural playstyle. For instance, running would improve athletics, and using a bow would improve marksmanship. Players could also read books or pay trainers as an alternative method of improving these skills. Ha! In 2006, Ubisoft released a horse riding simulator called Pippa Funnel Take the Reins, which allowed players to experience being a student in a prestigious horse riding school, where they could progress their skills through choosing which horse training classes or other activities they would like to allocate time to throughout the week. Each class or activity would enhance a skill and aid toward the game's narrative, as well as weekly competitions. There were classes aimed at improving horse care, as well as skills such as show jumping or dressage, as well as activities such as visiting the restroom, which enhance the player's social status, as well as allowing the player to develop relationships with their fellow students. This replicated a school setting where students are expected to juggle classes and social time, as well as creating a layer of strategy by forcing players to allocate their time wisely. Players need to care for their horse and go to classes to do well in the weekly competitions, as well as go to social activities to progress the game's overall story. I'd like to see how this idea of immersive skill progression could be pushed even further today. And while we're on the subject, I would also like to see more horse games. And no, I'm not talking about horses in games, not talking about you, Roach. I want more horsey games. Playstyle affecting the world. Maybe not the best title, but it's all I could come up with. Player agency is an important part of bringing a player into a game world, as it allows the player control and influence over the world itself. This arguably holds games apart from other forms of entertainment, such as films or books, whereby a consumer is simply a passive viewer. Games introduce player agency through interactable objects, cosmetic choices, side quests, and basically anything that can be influenced by the player. Lionhead's Fable truly grasped this concept by having many of its world systems adapt to the player's playstyle and moment-to-moment choices. It truly felt like your actions had an impact on Albion itself, as the characters within it would call you nicknames based on a title you'd unlocked by doing certain actions. The most popular being Chicken Chaser, you heartless monster. A player's character themselves would also cosmetically mirror their playstyle by depicting a more devilish or angelic form depending on how many good or bad deeds they'd performed. And other characters would react to this. Some would see you and scream if you looked like a demon, whereas others actually might prefer you that way.
You will make an excellent soldier.
In Fable 2, your character would also get visibly hench if you increase their strength stats. Too often, there doesn't really seem to be much repercussion in games for a player's choices, especially moral, moment-to-moment ones, such as deciding whether to steal or whether to attack an innocent character or chicken. NPCs might react in the moment, but once that's over, everyone kind of goes back to their own business and acts like nothing ever happened. Having the game react to the player's actions and decisions over time really elevates the importance of the decisions that can be made and just helps to make you feel like you're actually having an impact in the world around you. So that's a lot of game mechanics, but we're not finished yet because I got some special mentions that I really wanted to mention. Well, yes, that's why they're called special mentions. Here are some less specific game mechanics that I would like to see more of in the future. Couch co-op. As online multiplayer games have become more and more popular, allowing multiple people to play from the comfort of their homes on their own PCs or consoles, the need for split screen has wavered. However, I still find myself scouring through Xbox Game Pass and Steam to try and find a game that I can sit down and play with my friends while we're all in the same room. But why would I want to do that when we can just play from the comfort of our rooms? Well, for starters, it's cheaper. You only have to pay for one copy and you only have to have one screen or console, whatever it is. And also, there's just something magical about sharing your gaming moments with your friends in person. I have so many fond memories of bonding with family and friends over split-screen games such as Mario Kart and 007. And I want others to be able to experience that as well. And along with split screen, games also found other really unique ways to allow people to play games together on the same console. A game called Curi Curi Mix actually had two characters that could be separately controlled by each half of the PlayStation controller in its fast-paced puzzle platformer. And do not be duped by these cute looking bunnies. This game was super hard, and if you didn't have a friend to share the controller with you, then you would just be rage quitting. It's a From Software game, so what do you expect? Call me old-fashioned, but I really like to get some friends together, grab some snacks, get some drinks, and play games on one screen in the same room. And as games move more towards online multiplayer, there's just less and less options for us to play. There was once a time when you would buy a pre-owned game and hope that when you opened it up, you'd find a small scrap of paper. This paper would indicate a rare find that all gamers of the 2000s and earlier were eager to learn. Cheat codes. Cheat codes were a wonderful way for both players and developers to simply have some fun. It afforded some mystery around the game and got people talking about possible cheat codes that could help make your game easier, unlock different parts of the game, or even trigger secrets such as the fisheye lens view in The Sims. It's a shame that the word cheat now alludes to players ruining the game for other people or hacking it for themselves, when back in the day, devs used to have fun with these cheat codes and would put in little secrets for anyone who had the curiosity to seek them out. Game booklets. Okay, these are not game mechanics, no, but I really wanted to include this one as well. Game booklets used to be a really good way to introduce a player into a game world without them even having to insert a disc or hit play. These booklets not only gave players valuable information, such as the controls for the game, but they also introduced the game's narrative through colourfully worded character bios and pictures. As a child, I remember reading them fondly, especially when my mum would pick up a game at the store and I was reading it in the back of the car on the way home. And I would also use it to check up on the controls if I didn't want to have to pause the game to see them. Some booklets would even have maps within them that players would leave open in front of them while playing the game, so they didn't have to keep pulling up the in-game map, and this would really help with immersion. Again, this could just be nostalgia talking, but I do really miss having a physical object that helped build upon the narrative of the game world and lore. But I do understand that not having booklets is slightly better for the environment, so maybe we could look into new approaches to do this. Perhaps they could be stored online, and then there's a QR code that you can scan and get access to it from there. Or perhaps we could actually incorporate it into the game itself, like they did in Tunic. And that is a lot of game mechanics and special mentions, but I hope you enjoyed this trip down my gaming memory lane. Maybe it also unlocked some of your own gaming memories as well. As I was writing, I just kept on adding more game mechanics, but I'm sure there are so many more that I have missed. And as you can tell, I'm kind of biased towards horror games because that is what I love. So what game mechanics aren't on this list that you think really deserve to be? Do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, this whole video was just my opinion. You might hear some of these game mechanics and go, hell no, keep that in the past, that is not fun, and that's perfectly fine. We're all individuals with our own likes and dislikes. But I do really like picking apart what makes a game good to me and why I liked it. So I actually really enjoyed making this video. So thank you so much to my Patreons who actually voted for this video topic, because if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't be doing this video. I'd probably be doing another Unreal Engine tutorial, which I will be doing more of in the future, don't you worry. But yeah, much appreciate everything that you do, all of your support. If you want to say thank you, there's a little thank you button down here somewhere in YouTube, and of course you could also join the Patreon as well, links in the description. But I think that is enough for me, so I will see you in my next YouTube video. You can catch me on twitch.tv where I stream way more often if you, for some reason, want to hear more of my voice. Keep analysing games and have a lovely day or evening. Bye. Let's go back to the good old days of gaming. In my day, we had PlayStation 1 and 2, darling. Okay, stop.